Good afternoon. My name's Daniel Barton, and I'll be presenting to you this evening Career and Technology Funding in Texas. First off, there's two major sources of funding in Texas, state and federal funding. Federal funding is usually referred to as Carl D. Perkins. Your state funding, you'll find, is generally going to be around 90 to 94% of your overall funding for the district. So it's extremely important, and that's where I'll begin the conversation. The purpose of the Career and Tech programs are dedicated to preparing young people to manage the dual roles of family member and wage earner. Career and technical programs enable students to gain entry-level employment in a high-skill, high-wage job and or to continue their education. Simply put, this purpose is about preparing kids for college and career readiness at a high technical level or high skill level to be prepared for that global economy that we all talk about. Funding is generated by contact hours reported within PEIMS of students enrolled in CTE courses. They're reported as a V1 to a V6, depending on how many courses they're enrolled in. The formulation of the state funding usually looks at a student in one course as 1/6 of an FTE, and this will make more sense in a minute, but they're reported as a V1 to a V6. Eligible CTE students receive a 1.35 weighted funding to offset additional costs associated with their hands-on experience and other things that are related with CTE that are quite expensive at times, as I'm sure we all know. Funding for CTE is available for state-approved courses 9 through 12 and 7th and 8th for the career and technology education for the educationally disadvantaged. These are your students who are ARTed into courses such as an intro ag course at the 7th or 8th grade level. You can receive your career tech ed funds for those, so that's very important. An additional $50 is available to the school for each FTE generated within an advanced CTE course. And this is something that's relatively new. You'll find it on your summary of finance as well, the line item for that, how many students are enrolled in those advanced courses. The advanced course list is found on TEA's website under the curriculum department, and then, of course, the CTE program page. Talk about full-time equivalents, because full-time equivalents are generated through the contact hours that I spoke of a while ago, and FTEs are used in the actual formulation, the overall formulation of your state funding amounts. So what is an FTE? It's one student enrolled in 30 hours or contact hours of CTE instruction a week for the entire year. And you'll notice I put 45 minutes in there. That's an important point. The state looks at 1 hour as 45 minutes or greater, that they will count that. If you have a course that's 44 minutes, and through some of the unique scheduling we've done in the past, I've seen it where that has been the case. And if you report a kid for if you enroll a kid in 2 CTE courses that are 44 minutes, he will still only generate a V1 funding versus the V2 that you might expect. So you have to make sure that in your master schedule that you include 45-minute courses or greater. So another example, obviously, if 6 students are enrolled in one CTE course for the year, that'll equal 1 FTE. So 60% of your CTE funds must be spent on the CTE program. 40% may be spent on administrative and indirect costs. This is new. It used to be 90%. I've seen it as low as, I believe, 85% before. So this is relatively new. It's 60% and 40% for administrative and other indirect costs. 60% that's spent on the program must be coded as Program Intent 22. The formulation of the CTE allotment is the full-time equivalent times your average basic allotment times the CTE multiplier, which includes the extra 35%, the 1.35 funding level. The FTE, specifically, how is it formulated? You're going to take for instance, your number of 1-hour students attending 180 days and multiply that times 0.167. If they're a 2-hour student or in 2 courses or 1 2-hour course, then they would be a .33. If they're in a 3-hour course, then it would be .5. So you can see like .167 represents a sixth of the day, 2/6 of the day for 33%, 50% of the day on a 3-hour course. So you can see that 1/6 representation I refer to. Now, you've got to adjust your FTE for it to really be important to you in the overall calculation. You adjust it by your ADA or your average daily attendance. And your best place to look is obviously at your high school's attendance, and you're going to have to look over several years. We run around 95% here, so that's what I'm going to utilize in the calculation. But if you have a campus that's 92, 93% at the high school level, and I've seen that happen, then you'll want to use that to adjust your FTEs, or that percentage. So again, you're going to take your adjusted FTE at this point times your ABA found on the summary of finance and multiply it times 1.35. So let me show you an actual formulation. So if you have one biz ed teacher or a CTE teacher with 120 students in 8 45-minute classes, then you're going to take 120 and multiply that times 0.167, and that's going to equal 20 FTEs. And notice that the 8 periods has nothing to do with the calculation. The important is the 120 students at 45 minutes. So you take your 20 FTEs, and we're going to multiply them by the 95% ADA to adjust it, and we'll get 19 FTEs. And then we're going to take 19 FTEs times the basic allotment amount of 5,136, again off the summary of finance, multiply it times 1.35, and that gives you $132,000 versus at a 1.0 funding or a 100% funding level without the weighted funding or non-weighted at $97,000. So it's very important to making these programs be able to meet the needs of the programs. So I want to talk about federal funds. The first thing that you need to know when it comes to finances, these funds are to supplement, not supplant. And what that means simply is they're to enrich your current programs. They're not to create programs. And you can read the purpose, but the most important part of the purpose that I've signified in yellow here, it's to put kids in a coherent sequence of courses that are designed for a career concentration so that students achieve both academic and occupational competencies. Why that's so important, obviously, is that we want to prepare the kids not only for their occupation, but in order to do that, they have to achieve at a higher academic standard or a high academic standard, and that's signified in that purpose. You typically, and again, this is just a guesstimation or to give you an idea, 6 to 8% of your state funding is generally what your Carl D. Perkins allotment is. Now, obviously, there's no in academic, that's not an academic percentage. That's just simply something to give you a general idea. So federal funding is how it's actually funded from the federal level. The allocation model is based actually on the census data, and 30% is based on the number of students that you have in your LEA that are 5 through 17. 70% is based on the number of students 5 through 17 that are below the poverty level. So that's the allocation model for Carl D. Perkins. There's 9 main goals of the program. One is obviously, or for the funds, and one is program improvement. One is staff development, career guidance and counseling, provide instruction for students who are members of special populations, establish local education and business partnerships, purchasing, leasing, or upgrading program equipment, that's to achieve those industry standards, and supporting non-traditional training, non-traditional meaning a female taking a welding course for certification or a male taking a health science course for certification. Those are considered non-traditional students. Some of the specific allowable costs is teacher travel, CTE programs, that's above the local level. CTE programs grades 7 through 12, against, as I mentioned, The 7th and 8th grade programs that are going to benefit are going to be your CTED programs. Student career guidance, grades pre-K through 12. CTE curriculum and instructional materials, CTE textbooks, and student career interest and aptitude tests. And I'll speak to the career guidance as there's obviously most of us have programs that go down through the elementary schools and career exploration and such for our young students, and it supports that, as well as the aptitude test and our interest testing, such as the Explore test or the Plan test. A few of the unallowable costs: any purchases outside of the grant dates. So that means anything that's purchased has to be done within the grant dates, and the expenditure has to be incurred within those dates, or it's unallowable. Student travel, single article of equipment costing more than $5,000 without approval. Within the e-grant system, there is an approval process. There's a line, basically, you can describe the need for any piece of equipment beyond $5,000 for approval, but if not, then it's not allowable. Student organization membership dues, motorized vehicles, or trailers. Some more unallowable costs are construction or remodeling of facilities, consumable supplies, teacher stipends, food costs except for the Family Consumer Science program, furniture and CTE programs prior to the 7th grade. And that's again for programs prior to the 7th grade. That excludes the guidance. Guidance is allowable as to supplement. LEA must generate $15,000 to administer the grant independently. There's a $15,000 threshold, and that if you fall below the threshold, then you're going to have to do one of two things. You can do a shared service arrangement to where you and the district next to you, if you get $8,000 and the district next to you receives $10,000, the two of you together have $18,000. They'll allow you to administer that grant as a cooperative, I guess to say, or shared. Most often what happens if you fall below the $15,000 threshold, the Regional Service Center will actually administer that for you. It is a benefit to administer your own because financially you'll receive more of the funds in the end. To kind of wrap things up as far as federal funding, I want to talk about administrative management of the federal funds grant, kind of the main things that go on throughout your year. One is the PEM submission, very important. The V1 through V6 is you're submitting your contact hours. You need to make sure your master schedule is generating through in excess of 45 minutes per course to make sure that PEM submission is accurate. The E-Grant TEAS access, you'll need that in order to get into the E-Grant system. TEAS access, that is. TEA will notify you of your allotment amount. That's generally, hopefully, in August to September, if you're lucky. You'll actually complete the grant. They'll notify you of grant approval, and you can begin expending funds. In February, usually, somewhere around February, there's a reauthorization allotment where they offer more money. And that's generally, it has been my personal experience there, again, is what that's based on. There's 10 to 20% of your original funding amount. So it is quite appreciable and important to involve yourself in the reauthorization allotment. At the end of the year in June, you'll receive a notification that to do your performance evaluation review, or what's formally called the PER. And the PER is basically a reflection on the success of your federal funds program or Carl D. Perkins within your local district. And that kind of completes your grant cycle, and then you start it all over again. That's kind of a general overview of state funding and federal funds, and at any point in time when you discuss these funding sources in career and technology, you're discussing something that is very large and can be very comprehensive. So I've done the best I could to make it simple and understandable. So I hope I've done a good job, and that you've learned something about state and federal CTE funding in Texas, and that will commence my presentation. Thank you very much.